Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very important and informative show. We are going to focus on international taxation and compliance in Rwanda. Amongst the many things that we're going to tackle here regards transfer pricing. We're looking at how we balance between multinational enterprises, ensuring that they pay taxes within the legal framework in Rwanda, as well as balancing that fine act with getting the benefits from these MNEs, multinational enterprises. You know, when you hear the Panama Papers or the Pandora Papers and that sort of thing, these are leaks by consortiums of journalists that showcase how some huge corporations avoid taxes by storing them in offshore, you know, sort of offshore accounts, and we're going to see how that can be prevented in Rwanda, how that is being prevented in Rwanda, and what Rwanda is doing to grow its tax base as well as protect it. So it's quite an informative show. We'll try and not make it as technical as possible, try and make it as easily digestible to our public in the simplest terms possible, but it's a very we felt it was a very important issue to tackle at this particular time. And I'm very happy to welcome on the show tonight from the Rwanda Revenue Authority, the Assistant Commissioner in charge of Taxpayer Audit, Mr. Ronald Niwenshuti. Welcome to The Square, Ronald.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And I know your twin brother was on the show some time back. He works at the Ministry of Trade and Industry. There's some confusion. Even for some of us, we thought, you know, one of you had moved to different institutions. So great to have you on the show, Ronald.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. Also joining us on the show are the Square resident panelists. I'm happy to welcome, after quite a long hiatus, Bernard Namata. Great to have you, Bernard, resident panelist on the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan. I missed you.
How does it feel to be back after quite a while?
I'm excited.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
it.
Also joining us is resident panelist Charles Haba. Charles, always a pleasure to co-host with you.
Same here, Dan. How are you?
Good.
Happy New Year, Bana.
Happy New Year. Oh, yeah. God, it's still Happy New Year.
I know. When do people stop saying Happy New Year, by the way?
I think end of January.
The Christmas tree in London is brought down on the 31st of January.
Okay.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think
Globally.
it matter that the city of Kigali brought down the Christmas lights, I think on the 4th. They couldn't wait to stop paying the electricity bill.
Anyway, thank you all for joining us, and for viewers, thank you for tuning in every Wednesday as you do. Before we kick off, I don't know, it's such a meaty convo, and Ronald is going to tell us a lot. Do we have any midweek highlights?
Yeah, I saw something in the course of the week that disturbed me quite a bit. I actually saw this on Monday and yesterday, and that is the dire situation in Kigali. And I will pick two neighborhoods. One is Nyarutarama, and the second is Kagugu, and it's very high-end neighborhoods. In Kagugu, I saw people with jerry cans going to fetch water. And then, just before I was about to comment about it on my social media feed, the following day on Tuesday, there's an area, I don't know what it's called. It links Nyarutarama to Chivagabaga. People fetch water from ponds or pits or however that dirty, filthy water is. And like, really, these are the richest neighborhoods of Kigali. It's extremely absurd. Is it very difficult for WASAC to have public taps or water fetching points in these areas? If that is the case in Kigali, what is it out of Kigali? It's extremely painful for me.
That's quite alarming.
Yeah.
Bernard, any midweek highlights?
I don't feel like adding anything to what he has said. But just to say, I saw in the news Kigali City winning quite a bit of money that is coming in from the Bloomberg.
Some of that in water.
Thank you. Yes. So I hope.
The Bloomberg.
Yes. I hope that money goes into solving that, but also making the city livable for those at the bottom of the pyramid and those, you know, because sometimes it looks like those at the top of the pyramid continue to advance and,
This is in regards to what exactly?
It's a whole topic.
On its own.
But to what he's saying, that you have a very fancy neighborhood, and then on the other hand, you have people who are struggling to access water within the same, location. So I hope Kigali City fixes some of those things. Yep.
Thank you very much. Yes, back to the topic at hand. It's quite a very interesting topic. And Ronald, thank you once again on behalf of Rwanda Revenue Authority for joining us and taking time to explain some of these key issues when it comes to international taxation. If you could just start by giving us a brief overview of the international taxation regime in Rwanda, with some of the current issues faced, as well as the impact this has on our tax base. Over to you, Richard. Sorry, over to you, Ronald.
Thank you very much. I'll take the comment that was made on Twitter. It's understandable.
Yes, the confusion is understandable.
It's understandable.
Between you, identical twins.
Yes. So thank you, Diana, and the team for having me today. I think there's nothing good like starting it with the concerns that have just been raised of those that are at the bottom and those that are at the top, and what the government is trying to address in terms of collecting revenue and then be able to help those that are not able to get some of the basic necessities, such as water, Abba has just mentioned. So international taxation is one of the areas that we are looking at as Rwanda Revenue Authority to make sure that we mobilize revenue to be able to support a government budget and be able to distribute or address such issues that we have. So let me start off maybe with trying to introduce or explain how this issue is. Basically, there's no international law on taxation. So countries look into their own domestic laws to be able to address any tax linkages that come along as a result of that. And there are two areas that I will touch on. One being the two principles, residence and source principle in international taxation, and also I'll look at the tax rates, or what we call the race to reduce tax rates, or the race to increase the tax rates in that matter. So when you look at the two principles, countries have tax depending on residence principle. You call that outbound taxation, or they base on source principle, which is the inbound taxation. What does that mean? Outbound taxation is that we look at the resident, whether it's an individual or a corporation, income that they make in Rwanda or outside Rwanda has to be taxed. And in that scenario, when we say resident, we're not talking about Rwandan residents. We are talking about any individual company making income registered and respecting and with all the laws that are used in Rwanda, so registered and incorporated in Rwanda, or conducting business in Rwanda. So that is one aspect, residence principle. So when you look at the source principle here, we are looking at how do we tax a foreigner who makes income in Rwanda. So now we are looking at the source. If someone comes in here, you hire a consultant, provides a service, and goes back, how do we tax them, despite the fact that they don't have physical presence in Rwanda? So these two principles are the two regimes that Rwanda Revenue implements, and they are embedded within the income tax law. So the residence and the source principle. Another area I wanted to show is the tax rates. So countries have different tax rates when it comes to income. So you have 30% corporation tax, probably in Rwanda we have 30%. When you go to other countries, they have zero rate, for example. Of course, there are reasons why. Sometimes it depends on how they mobilize the revenues. Maybe they have alternative revenue mobilization areas that they can get that income. So this difference in rates also creates what we would call the international tax issues. So the rates issue, the residence and the source principle put together makes corporations or multinationals decide where income can be taxed. So income is shifted out of the country in form of expenses or deductions from countries that have higher rates to countries with low rates. And this is where you see these issues that come up of transfer pricing aggressive tax planning, for example, on capital gains tax, withholding tax and compliance on services that are imported into the country. And that complexity is what causes the issues or the linkages that we have in taxation. So basically, this is the basis of the whole complexity that we have in international taxation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronald. After this, I want to go to a couple of tweets, but I want to start by just asking you to, to expound on what you said. You identified the issues, the gaps that we're dealing with when it comes to international taxation. Can you tell us the effect of these issues on the Rwandan tax base? What does that mean for Charles, for Brenna, for as taxpayers? What is the dent it makes? What is the sort of direct impact some of these gaps you mentioned are?
Thank you, Dana. Now, I did talk about the corporation shifting income out of the country in form of deductions. So what does that mean? I'll come to the impact. For example, if a corporation has different subsidiaries in different countries, what we have seen over the years is that some of these corporations tend to shift income in form of expenses. So when they shift this income in form of expenses, their profits that can be taxed in Rwanda definitely go down. So this is base erosion and profit shifting. So the base that we can only tax in Rwanda goes down. The result will be that the income that we collect, the income tax that we collect, will definitely be very low. And ultimately, government is going to lose out on some of the funds to support the budget, the national budget. And that will translate in what Haba started by saying: people want to get the water, people want to get education, the roads, infrastructure, peace that we always enjoy in Rwanda. So all these necessities are going to be missed out because of certain aggressive practices that we have seen.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Ronald, for linking it to, for viewers' sake, to these tangible things that Charles spoke about, our infrastructure, our roads, our, public schools, the healthcare system, water access, and that sort of thing. I just want to go to a Twitter feed before I go to Charles and Brenna to hear what they have to say based on Ronald's really good comprehensive explanation of taxation, international taxation issues in Rwanda. The first tweet is from ICGN, who says, ask him, meaning Ronald, ask him more about the taxation system on the recently signed CFTA and its equal management for all signed countries. That's the first tweet we have coming in. We have another tweet coming in as well, and if you could have that on our screens. This tweet is from AK90, who says, I hope you will include the avoidance or status of double taxation and equity in taxation for local business actors. And then the third tweet we have coming in, and it really pans to what you were saying earlier on, Ronald, is from Bernard, who says, in light of the huge penalties imposed on the biggest tech firms by the US and EU countries for anti-competitive practices and the imposition of a universal 15% tax, kindly explain what capacity Rwanda Revenue Authority has to tax and or penalize these firms. Are we not being exploited by them? Very valid question there, especially since it's a global village, so these are corporates that exist all over the world. And Ronald, I'll give you a chance to answer some of these tweets, just so you can keep them fresh in your mind before we hear from the graduate panelists. Thank you.
Yes, let me start with the AFT protocol. Let me separate these two. The EFTA protocol really touches much on customs taxes. And again, this is a very good initiative that is speeding up investment within Africa. Again, countries forego taxes to make sure that trade within Africa is speeds up and is facilitated very well. Again, the benefits depend on how we seize the opportunity as a country to be able to export, to be able to also improve quality of our products, because I believe the roadmap has been laid by our leadership. On the second question, I didn't pick out exactly what was asked, because it looked like double taxation and domestic taxpayers, but I'll come back to that maybe in the clarity. But let me pick out on the last question, which I would say much goes on the digital services. On the digital service side, as Rwanda, we are yet in the initial stage. The government, of course, specifically Rwanda Revenue Authority, initiated a study to understand how much we are losing and then be able to have an informed decision on how we frame our laws and be able to tax these digital companies. Do we lose? Absolutely, we are losing. But how much are we losing? And that's what is being looked into. And the study will guide us on exactly how to tax that. But again, sometimes benefits do not lie in taxes alone. There are other benefits. So I'm sure the policymakers will be looking at balancing out on many things and also looking at the tax side. Mm-hmm. Penalizing them, of course, as you know, with this technological advancement that is coming in, yes, penalties are always going to be there. Of course, the law, the study, and again, the law will inform us how much we penalize these companies. But it's always complex when there is a unilateral decision when it comes to this. And I think you have seen in the world of taxation that some countries have gone unilaterally to tax these digital companies, and that has also caused other consequences. So Rwanda is being careful on taking decision on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronald. Berna, anything you'd like to share?
I think it's interesting that we're having this discussion at this point in time, because every country is looking at how to mobilize more resources after drowning all the reserves to deal with the pandemic. But like someone already observed, we know that multinationals by their nature are very, well-resourced. And so as you try to catch them, they're always a step ahead. So if we can get more clarity in terms of the capacity at Rwanda Revenue to deal with multinationals, with specific examples, without mentioning names, but in terms of this is something we are dealing with, and maybe if there's a trend, and why it would be good to have that clarity around the capacities, because we know that it is a global issue, and it's not just low-income countries. You also have the advanced and rich countries that are dealing with this issue, and I think the discussion is more advanced within Europe. The OECD has been documenting this. UNECA estimates show that Africa as a continent is losing about 100 billion, because of this whole profit shifting and tricks. Oxfam has also documented this. So it's a very complex issue. And again, it comes at a time when Rwanda is trying to build a financial center. This discussion would be only complete with RDB on this table, and it's something that I would want him to comment on, because for RDB, you're attracting investments and you're offering the best incentives, because the market out there is big and you're trying to offer the best. So I feel that if we can get more clarity in terms of capacity to deal with multinationals, as we are seeing RDB has done a good job in terms of attracting these multinationals. We see the curve is going up. So let's hear more in terms of capacity. Secondly, I don't think you can do it alone. It has to be at a regional level. Because again, if you look at how some of these multinationals operate, you would need help from your neighbors. So our capacity in terms of dealing with economic fraud, that is also something I would love to hear more about.
Thank you. Charles?
Well, Ronald touched on a famous acronym, I think it's BEPS, that's business erosion and profit shifting. Base erosion, sorry. Yes. And it's basically around how you ensure that what is being taxed is not being missed out, and it's about ensuring that the profit that is collected, it's basic layman's terms. So when Ronald was coming to speak to the square, he assumed that all listeners or people who are watching TVR understand these basic things. But it's basically about how do you ensure that the base, everyone who is supposed to pay tax, pays tax, and every profit that is made is taxed. I hope I have done justice that acronym. Now, my concern is not really around that principle. My concern is really around the taxpayers themselves and the extent to which they are made aware of these changes. And considering we're talking about international taxation, it's the taxpayers who are global in nature. We are, as a country, putting a lot of effort, and Ronald alluded to the investment that is being made in pacifying Africa. We're putting a lot of effort in saying where efforts have been made by the RDF and the other security organs, and politically in Mozambique, in Central African Republic, in all these places, that we attract our businessmen to go there. They are the efforts that are being made in attracting businesses to come to Rwanda Finance Company and what have you. So it's not only the multinationals that you're referring to, Bana, it's even the ordinary Inyanje trader who has achieved a certain volume and is being attracted to sell products into Cabo Delgado. It is a fruit vendor who's producing enough fresh fruit to fit into a cold room, a 20-foot container cold room, to be exported elsewhere, to ensure that is captured. And my concern is really around that awareness of those treaties that exist. And I'll give two particular examples around the China one and the Luxembourg one, vis-a-vis the current goings on. So it's awareness is one of my biggest issue around our local business people. That's the first point I wanted to make, awareness around our local business people. But then just to build on to Bana's point earlier on around the efforts that are being made to attract investments into Rwanda. So we will move everywhere and we will sign a lot of bilateral treaties. The bilateral treaties are predominantly aimed at attracting investments into our country. Now, related to that, I asked myself, if maybe the classic example to give is Mauritius and Singapore, who are global hubs. What happens to those treaties vis-a-vis our own the new international taxation mechanisms? Are we not shooting ourselves in the foot? I understand the whole principle is around ensuring that we are internationally compliant, but we still need quite a bit of forex in our economy. So just a quick summary, two things: our local business people, how ready they are to be internationally taxed by a local entity, and secondly, marrying the treaties that we already have in place versus what we have here.
If I could just add that you also need to find a way of making sure that the profits are actually spent where they are made, because it's still a big issue. You know, most of these multinationals have sophisticated systems that allow them. I mean, this is not. You'll hear a company X is making a loss, and they will say that for the next 5 years, and then. But in actual sense, it's not like they are making a loss, but they are playing tricks and moving this money, and
it may not be tricks. Probably can get away with it.
Yeah, because I mean, the first thing that multinationals will do is really invest in good lawyers, tax lawyers, and they have the capability. Yeah. So how do you make sure that the money is the profits are actually spent where they are made? That's one. Two, on the other hand, you'll find that investors saying we need transparency around taxation. We also need that there's clarity, you know, of the tax laws, because sometimes it's a question of interpretation of the law, or to his earlier point, if the taxation policy is not predictable, it's also a problem.
If it keeps on changing,
yes,
it's a bit volatile.
Yes, it's also a problem. Yeah, so it would be good to hear more, what Rwanda Revenue is doing in that line.
Ronald, very many questions directed to you, but I know you came here prepared. So in a nutshell, two things. Number one, earlier on I talked about, you know, tax avoidance, evasion, you know, the different ways people or multinational enterprises avoid paying these taxes through various systems and loopholes. And you know, these tax havens in offshore tax havens in different countries. So when it comes to minimizing tax losses from MNEs, multinational enterprises, through loopholes in systems such as, for instance, transfer pricing, if you could share with us, as Brenna asked, what do we have in place? What systems do we have in place as a country? I know it's a complex issue, it's very pervasive, but what systems do we have in place to deal with this? And then second of all, you know, Brenna and Charles alluded to the fact earlier that it'd be great if you could have, you know, investment, you know, RDB here, or the institutions that bring in investment to the country. How do we balance this fine balance between, you know, the benefits of taxes that we get from multinational enterprises vis-a-vis attracting them to the country as well? Are there tax initiatives to ensure they stay in the country and operations? So if you could, I know it's a bit of a loaded question, if you could share with us those two key responses.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate all the views that have been raised. Like I'd started saying, international taxation is all about jurisdictions, how countries are prepared to protect their taxing rights on income. Again, on income, to be specific. So when you look at our mission as tax administration, we are not only focusing on raising revenue, but also making the business environment thrive, or even facilitating investors as well. So it is balanced. And in so doing, the government of Rwanda has put in place different laws. So I would say we have a broad legal framework that guides us in implementing this, so that the government does not only benefit by collecting taxes, but also the investor is protected in his dealing and be able to make the profit and also benefit out of it. Starting with income tax law. We had an income tax law from 2005 that had a transfer pricing article, and it had a minister's order clarifying clearly which methods to use and how to determine transactions that take place between related parties. Now, I must define very clearly what transfer pricing is for our viewers to understand. Now, when related persons or related corporations again, in this case, we are talking about multinationals, when they transact between themselves, the prices at which, the prices that they set at times, they are not at arm's length. Arm's length meaning they are not determined by forces of demand and supply or the market price in this particular case. But when people transact between themselves and are not related, definitely the prices are going to be the market price because everyone is trying to pull his side, make sure that he's benefiting in this. So transfer pricing then comes to clarify and regulate how these transactions between related companies, whether within the country and outside the country or within the country, because sometimes they can be in the country, two companies related in the country but with different tax regimes. So transfer pricing then clarifies and says in circumstances where prices between related persons are not at arm's length, the taxpayers ought to justify or make adjustments so that there is no loss of tax. So take an example, if a company is outside of Rwanda and another one is in Rwanda. So let me come to the base erosion, what we're talking about base erosion. If a company in Rwanda transacts with a related party in a country that is 0% income tax rate, the tendency that we have seen is that the country with the higher tax rate will be a consumer than a seller, because you will see a lot of expenses coming from abroad at a higher price, and the country and the company within Rwanda paying for those services at a higher price, higher than the market price. Should related persons transact? Of course, no problem. But they should transact at a price that is fair and doesn't erode the taxable base. So the income tax law came to regulate that, and in 2020, the minister put in place a ministerial order 003 that clearly stipulates how we regulate such transactions between related persons. Let's use between multinationals, now not even in Rwanda. And here we collect information, of course, not to be very subjective or unfair in taxing this transaction. The taxpayer has a right or has a responsibility to clarify how they determine the prices between the related, between them and the related subsidiaries, wherever they might be. So the income tax law is very clear. It has got, we have got the transfer pricing guidelines. Under the transfer pricing guidelines, we request the taxpayers to keep a transfer pricing policy. Under the transfer pricing policy, you show us who did you transact with, what did you transact, was it a service or good, at what value. Then we shall look at the tax rate in that country. So all this helps us to understand that there was no, what I would say, intentions to erode the taxable base. So we have a robust income tax law. We also have the DTA. You did talk about the double tax agreements. The double tax agreement, the intention of the double tax agreements is to ensure that we not only look at taxation and tax taxpayers that trade with us, Rwanda, but also be able to define which income we should tax. And then we also leave out income that should be taxed by the other country that we have a treaty with. Commonly, you will find that under the double tax agreement, the tax rates are reduced. So in circumstances where we have a standard rate of 15%, in Rwanda we would normally have between 10 and 12%, meaning we always give a right even to the other country to be able to tax. So the DTAs or the double tax agreements avoid overtaxing one income by two countries on the same taxpayer. This in particular helps the taxpayer himself not to be victimized or overtaxed. And the DTAs have been, we have managed to, the government of Rwanda have managed to sign over 10 DTAs now, and the process continues. This helps in the in investment promotion, but also keeps our right to tax also protected. What we have seen now, and what we have seen over the years, is that some corporations do what we would call treaty abuse. Others call it treaty shopping. You will find a corporation that is somewhere in Europe benefiting a treaty that is somewhere in the south of Africa, because they pass in that country to come into Rwanda. So by virtue of the eyes and without doing tests to confirm whether really this treaty should benefit such a corporation, a lot of income has been lost in such circumstances. So we have to protect that under our laws. So treaties are also in place to promote investment, give a right to Rwanda to be able to tax, again, income that it should tax. But also, number 3, we have multilateral agreements. In 2021, the government of Rwanda signed the MAC. The MAC, which is the Mutual Administrative Assistance Convention on Exchange of Information, was put in place to be able to collect a lot of information on taxpayers, again, to be able to be fair in our taxation, but also be able to know how multinationals conduct their business, but at the same time be able to support and work with other countries. So the MAC also helps us to get information. All these legal frame documents that I'm trying to put in place are helping us, and we helping Rwanda to protect its right to tax all this income.
Ronald, I would like to just cut you short there and just ask you if you could move to the next part of, and this connects to what Charles said. You know, you're talking about all these frameworks that have been put in place to protect Rwanda's tax base and grow it. But I'm just wondering, what is the level of awareness with all these treaties, all these agreements that Rwanda is signatory to in terms of international taxation? What is the awareness locally when it comes to our taxpayers in Rwanda? What's the level of awareness, if you could just briefly talk on that?
Thank you very much. On the level of awareness, we have, in the last 2 years, we have moved to conduct various workshops with our multinationals. And I'm glad to say that we have seen a high response in terms of complying with some of the laws, with all the laws to do with international taxation, although awareness continues. And here I would appreciate that you gave us this opportunity to highlight these issues, because I'm sure our audience is following and understanding a lot to do with international taxation. We are also conducting a lot of tax clinics. Again, we have put out a lot of information on our websites to make sure that taxpayers understand a lot to do with international taxation. We have also done trainings for our staff to develop their capacity to detect and we're able to close linkages in taxation. We are also on various media outlets to be able to tell and work and be able to discuss and also share information on this. Of course, it is a complex issue. It takes long people to understand it, but the consequences are so huge. That's why we have stepped up this awareness campaign for people to understand that we need to protect the taxable base.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Charles?
Yeah, I want to concur with Ronald, and for sure, government means well when they sign all these treaties. It's to drive investment, attract a lot of investment as possible, and it's with good intention, absolutely. I think an area that needs to be very, very severely polished is around the interpretation. Bana did mention about multinationals, but every business that is worth its teeth will employ reasonably sounding people in the tax and financial advisory space. And today, because it's a very dynamic space, it's not like being a journalist. What you know, if you know how to report, you know how to report. And this is targeted at Bana specifically. But it's on a bit of a lighter note. But where I'm going with this conversation is around the preparedness of Rwanda Revenue Authority versus the targets that they are given by the policymakers in relation to compliance. And I will break this down in very, very simple terms. If a steel manufacturing company that has a base in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda decides not to produce in any of the countries and take full advantage of the East African Common Market Protocol. And they decide that because, and I think Ronald alluded to the fact that they move around and see at what price do you sell those goods and services.
Shopping, as he called it.
Yes, they shopping as as he called it.
Yes.
It may be that it is cheaper for the Rwandan entity to pay a purchase price of local steel here in Rwanda than it is for them to import it from their sister company, or even worse still, to produce from Rwanda. Right? And the nature of my business, I come across a lot of these transfer pricing challenges, and the most common issue you usually come across is interpretation, and Ronald alluded to that. The tax collector's view all the time of interpretation is predominantly driven by meeting their targets. The taxpayer's view of interpretation of the treaties and the benefits that the treaties have to them are predominantly driven by how it can contribute to their bottom line. How do I make as much profit as possible whilst interpreting this in one or another? And I think that's really the biggest issue that we need to come across. I know there's a big, we have discussed this on the square before, that amazing brains that like Ronald's will not last in Rwanda Revenue Authority because they're highly sought after in places where they can be better. But yes, I wanted to just make one more point to Bana's point, and that's around how do we ensure that we don't run into walls around making sure that people don't take their money away. Is by creating a conducive atmosphere where people invest and spend in our country at a decent return. There's certain things that we do as a country that where we're really shooting ourselves in the foot. And I'll give you only two examples. Number one, why do we wake up in the morning and say foreigners should not buy property in Rwanda, yet they are investing and making money in Rwanda? If we woke up in the morning and said, in as long as you have made money in Rwanda, irrespective of whether you're from Mars, you're allowed to own property, would not be running into such issues of transfer pricing and issues that RRA runs into with this whole international taxation. So let us stop shooting ourselves in the foot. If we want, why don't we allow people to spend money up to 4 a.m. in the morning and stop saying that bars close at 8 p.m. As light as it may sound, but I am going to spend my entertainment allowance as a British national, the entertainment allowance that I am entitled to in this country, I will just spend it in another country.
So you think that international taxation, one, polish interpretation. That was your first submission.
Yes.
And to try and see how we can
Let's
widen the scope of
how we invest
and spend.
Yes, and allow expenditure, because I think in his opening remarks, Ronald did talk about expenditure, and I think that's where really the gist of the matter is. Yes.
Brenna?
I have more questions than...
Unfortunately, we don't have time for all of them.
But just briefly on, again, going back to Ronald, I'm still thinking about RDB's mandate and RRA, and who has more power in terms of determining who gets what. And the reason I would want him to comment is because when you look at the competition for investment, in most low-income countries, you'll find that favorable tax rates is what agencies would use.
Yes.
And sometimes it's more or less like race to the bottom. So from Rwanda Revenue's point of view, if we could get some insight on one, do they do cost-benefit analysis that at least informs who gets what? And how do you avoid instances where multinationals come in and take advantage of the environment and just leave? Remember, they're too big. They're too big, they're sophisticated. How do you deal with that? Yeah.
Ronald, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders in terms of answering questions from Berna, responding to Charles's, concerns. But yeah, over to you if you could answer that with the few minutes we have left before we go to our Twitter feed.
Thank you very much, Haba and Brenda. This issue is very complex, but it has got solutions because I think the COVID crisis has shown us how countries will definitely look to themselves in times of crisis. And one of the areas that a country is going to be strong is how much revenue can it mobilize to fund anything that might come up without looking out to the outside. And again, for you to mobilize revenue, you need to protect the base. And for you to protect the base, you have to look at who is making income and where is that income being made. We will not follow income that is outside Rwanda if you don't have a right on that. But if you have a right on income that is made in Rwanda by Rwandese and income made outside Rwanda by a resident of Rwanda, then the laws will fall upon that. But here, when we talk about a resident, we mean even non-Rwandese, but conducting business in Rwanda. Again, Haba and Brenda talked about that income is taxed where it is sourced. So whenever you have a right on that, let's be able to protect it and tax that income, but also tax it fairly, because again, we are not up to taxing. We are even we also consider that this investment will continue to make profits, and then we tax more. So it's not about taxing 1 year and it closes. And that brings me to our relationship with RDB. We work closely with RDB in different areas, of course, as government. And of course, without RDB, we can't exist because we tax his investment. And RDB looks for that investment that we tax. So our discussions, though sometimes might differ, but we always work together to make sure that the business environment is fairly treated, but also the tax, we don't lose on that. Just to compete on that is that we have a very clear investment code. Within the investment code, the government of Rwanda has prioritized certain sectors for which it has reduced the tax rates. So if our standard tax rate is 30%, these sectors, some of them you will find that 0% or 15% or 5%, even you have tax holidays. but it is specific on these sectors that the government has considered priority. So even with the race to the bottom, there has been priority to make sure that we don't give away much, because even when we give away or we reduce the tax rate, it doesn't mean that this company won't be taxed. Whenever we reduce the tax rate, we are giving out a right to another country to tax, yet the source has been in Rwanda. So I would close by saying that there's a need for government institutions to work together.
Absolutely.
To make sure that these aspects of international tax are clearly understood, but also investment is also protected to make sure that there's growth.
Thank you, Ronald. And I can't thank you enough, especially for closing by saying that institutional coordination when it comes to these issues is a big, big deal. RDB, RRA, and other like-minded institutions. I just want us to go to a Twitter feed. I don't think we'll have time to respond to the tweets that are coming in, but we can carry on this conversation online for sure. And the first tweet is from CGN, who says that tax evasion by individuals would always make a bad difference throughout the continent, but wouldn't spillovers and tax competition amongst countries rise? And what is your opinion on countries with high corruption growing through Rwanda's line? That's the first tweet coming in. We have other tweets coming in from Bugingo, and he says that focusing mostly or exclusively on the agenda of international taxation and ignoring the rest of the taxation structure, we are not going to be able to get enough revenue as a country. We need to restructure taxation for locals to attract local payers to invest. That's his first tweet. And the last tweet from the night is also from him. And he says, focus needs to be paid to basic reforms and the nuts and bolts of raising taxes domestically, not by having friendly regimes for local taxpayers, not focus heavily on incentives of international corporations. I agree with Charles Haber, lower taxes and widen the base. Ronald, unfortunately, we don't have time for you to answer this. Maybe in a minute or two. Would you like to respond to that last tweet?
Let me pick out the one that is before that.
Yes.
On what are we doing on the domestic.
Yes.
I want this to be clear that many initiatives are not being done on international tax corporations. We are also focusing on the domestic taxes. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the domestic companies, not multinationals, there are so many initiatives that have been in place to make sure that they comply, they understand taxation, but they also make sure to be able to contribute to the tax collections. I just single out one so that I don't take long. We have instituted a very simplified tax regimes on small taxpayers. You'll find that from 2 million to 12 million, they have a fixed amount. We have what we call the lump sum regime, where they pay a percentage of that so that they don't go into a lot of cost of hiring accountants. So there's a lot that is being done also on small taxpayers and as well multinationals, because we need to mobilize and work with all taxpayers to be able to expand the taxable base. So there's no better ones over the others.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ronald. Definitely, I feel like I was in class. I don't know about you, Charles and Marna. Definitely, I've learned a lot. We all, we don't really look forward to the taxman, Ronald. Like you said, nothing is certain than death and taxes, but it is what keeps our country moving. It's what grows our country. So thank you so much for very insightful, informative points regarding international taxation, and also, the conversation you had on local or domestic taxpayers, their regimes that are also promoted as much as possible. Ronald, thank you very much for coming onto the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Charles, always a pleasure.
Same here.
Having you. Berna, it's been really good to have you back after a while. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
very much. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Keep the conversation going using #TheSquareRW. I know for a fact Rwanda Revenue Authority will be engaging online with some of these comments and suggestions and questions. To our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always supporting The Square. To our viewers, have a good night. See you again next week.